Welcome to This Old Tree, a show that features heritage trees and their human stories. You'll hear interviews with experts, historians, and regular folks to celebrate the myths and uncover the real tales. This Old Tree is sponsored by Schwartz Tree and Landscaping in Cranston, Rhode Island. Professional tree service, landscaping, and plant management. Visit schwartztreecare.com or call 401-941-4440. Now, here is your host, Doug Still.
Beech trees have a smooth, thin, gray bark that makes the perfect writing tablet for vandals. This is true for both Fagus grandifolia, that's American beech here in North America, and the species Fagus sylvatica, indigenous to much of Europe. You can't blame tree lovers or park managers for shaking their heads in dismay upon seeing Johnny plus Susie scratched proudly onto a trunk, marring it for decades. But not everyone feels that way. There's a magnificent copper beech in Ireland, Gort, in County Galway to be exact, where bark signatures were not only appreciated but encouraged. They made the tree famous. Thousands of tourists come to visit it each year, also to see the Coole Park Nature Reserve where it stands. What's the story here? To crack this beech nut, we need to delve into the world of Isabella Augusta Gregory, or Lady Gregory as she's known. Writer, intellectual, playwright, folklorist, and patron of the Irish literary revival at the turn of the 20th century, Lady Gregory drew writers of her day to her house and garden. If they made the grade, they were allowed to sign our subject today, the autograph tree. I'm Doug Still, and this is This Old Tree.
This old tree, standing here for more than 4 centuries. Wonder what you'd say if you could talk to me about what it's like to be this old tree.
Shoot the one hoe, she gaya narragid. Shoot the one hoe, all falling is more. She carved, she custy her bark as farraga.
Who was Lady Gregory, and why were her literary guests at Coole Park signing her copper beech tree? I have two of the world's foremost scholars on Lady Gregory here to describe her life and passions. Dr. James Pethica of Williams College and Dr. Anna Pills of the University of Edinburgh. First, however, I actually had the privilege of traveling to Gort, Ireland, to stand beneath the canopy of this amazing tree in person, as William Butler Yeats did, and George Bernard Shaw, and Sean O'Casey, George William Russell, and many others. While there, I met some very kind staff members at the Coole Park Nature Reserve, including Becky Teasdale, Jenny Maguire, Niall O'Reilly, and Margot Pierrell, who not only showed me the beech tree, but also the gorgeous woods and paths and lakes that make up this conservation gem. Here's my interview with Jenny Maguire, the head guide at Coole, with the noble beech towering over us. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Doug. Nice to meet you.
For our listeners, what's the setting here and what is Coole Park?
So, yes, we're in a mixed broadleaf woodland. It's a nature reserve of about 1,000 acres. We're standing in the walled garden within that nature reserve. We're about 10 kilometres inland from the coast at Kinvara. So we're quite low-lying here. It was designated a nature reserve in 1983, but prior to that it has a rich cultural history dating back to 1768 when the park area, initially 600 acres, was acquired by the first of 4 generations of Gregorys to own this estate. So that was Robert Gregory in 1768. Subsequent four generations of the Gregory family have continued a tradition of planting trees in the estate. The first, Robert, set building stone walls all around the boundary, and he established a nursery in what is now our red deer enclosure to furnish the woodlands with exotic trees. As the age of botany developed and explorers went travelling further afield, they were able to bring back more exotic specimens. So as you go for perhaps a little wander around the reserve later on, you may see specimens that you may be more familiar with in the States. Like we have western red cedar, we have a sequoia, we have Monterey pine. So all of these are our living history, the legacy left behind by the Gregory family.
I recognize some of them on the drive in, and it was spectacular. We drove sort of into a tunnel of trees from the countryside, and you instantly know you're in a different space.
That's right, yeah. I mean, estates were all about status symbols as well, and the main driveway that you came in on will have been planted up by the third generation of Gregory family. So they planted a lot of lime trees, so a common lime, around Quercus ilex, so holm oak or holly oak. And this formed like a Gothic arch above the main driveway, which was intended to have impact as people approached the estate.
Yes, you tested me on the holly oak just a minute ago, and I failed miserably, but it's a very interesting
We'll
tree.
let you off.
What part of the estate are we on now?
So we're in the walled garden. We're not too far from the main house. That was built in 1770, I believe. But the house was kind of central in the whole estate, and the walled garden was a little bit off to the left. It's a walled garden. It used to be called the Flower Garden in Lady Gregory's time. So Lady Gregory was the wife of the final Gregory generation to own the estate. She married Sir William Gregory in the 1800s. She was very young. She wasn't from far away. She was only from another wealthy landowning estate of Roxburgh, about 5 miles from here.
I see.
She was the youngest of a family of about 17 children, and a little bit disregarded by her parents.
Well, after 16 other siblings, you know.
Yeah, I think so. I think they were a bit bored of children at that point.
Right. Well, she made a name for herself.
She did. So the walled garden itself was really only a minor factor of the estate. It was a place where they could come and sit and enjoy the peace and quiet and the additional heat that a walled garden provides, the high walls protecting from the salt-laden wind. It wasn't the main destination. The autograph tree would not have been the focal point of the walled garden. I mean, you saw as you walked in that it's off to the side. It's not in a central location. It doesn't draw the eye until you get a bit closer to it and have stopped looking at everything else.
Jenny shared that Lady Gregory was widowed in 1892.
That's when her life kind of took off in a literary fashion. But also, parallel to that was her love of tree planting. She then met William Butler Yeats, a famous poet. She'd met him in London in 1896. And he then came to Coole. She invited him to Coole in 1898. And thus was the start of a lifelong friendship. He subsequently visited Coole Park for 20 consecutive summers. He was the first to be invited to carve his initials in the autograph tree.
I see.
Now, this wasn't a new practice. Like, trees are etched all over the world. But
that's one of the ID features for a beech tree. You know, if someone's carved their initials into it. You know, when you teach people for the first time.
It's the smooth bark. It's perfectly.
It just welcomes that.
It does. And Lady Gregory, she knew her trees, as is evident in an article she wrote for the Irish Homestead at a time when horticultural practice and actual females planting trees and knowing so much about silviculture was quite unheard of, and her to write a practical article about planting trees was quite unusual.
If you listen closely, you can hear the rain pattering down on the canopy of the autograph tree above us. Jenny read a quote from a visitor to the walled garden named Signy Toxvig.
That afternoon I found the garden. The rare glow of sunshine lay on the high grey walls, hung with yellow drooping roses and reddening vines and waxy white flowers. A broad-shadowed walk ran the length of the wall. There was an enchanting vista of it from the garden gate. I went slowly along, crushing rosemary between my fingers, and wondering at the dark groups of stately Irish yews. At the end of the garden, I found a gate in the wall, a big, old, rusty and green gate, through which I peered at a wet wilderness of trees and mossy stones. So, as you've seen yourself, it doesn't look too much different to those times. It hasn't changed an awful lot, but the big difference is the gate at the end of the wall. Now, that was locked in those times. Yeats was given a key. He had free rein of the grounds. When he came to visit here, Lady Gregory really looked after him. He was given the best room in the house. He was given free rein of the wine cellar, which really irked her son, Robert. She set out fresh paper and ink for him every morning, and she really tried to nurture his writing. He was given the key to Nutwood, and he would often be found just wandering, lost in thought. If he passed anybody, he rarely acknowledged them. He was very much away with the fairies.
That's funny.
So what she created here was a literary landscape within a woodland setting. Like, she had equal love of both. You know, she loved the literary side. She penned 50 plays herself. She nurtured Yeats. She invited all these literary greats here, whose names are all before us on the tree, slightly blurred now over time. When she set about gathering folklore from local Irish people, she took herself off to the Aran Islands off County Galway to go and gather folklore and translated it from Irish. So she was bringing the Irish language back into the fore when, at a time when Ireland was there was a lot of political unrest, and the Irish kind of Irishism was disappearing under the weight of that. And she wanted to revive that, and you know, she found her partner in Yeats to help do that. Yes, they both did. They did, and you know, the late 1800s, early 1900s was the Irish literary revival. They established the Irish National Theatre, you know, a world stage for Irish playwrights to have a voice. Up until then, it had been maybe American theatre companies, British companies touring, and the Irish people weren't very well portrayed, you know, a bit typecast. So this was an opportunity for Irish playwrights to...
And a celebration of Irish folklore. So you have a quote from Lady Gregory.
But Lady Gregory, to indicate her love of trees and her knowledge of trees. She wrote in the Irish Homestead, and this was printed in 1898, the same year that Yeats signed this tree. And she wrote, "We find the little seedlings we had put down in faith are over our heads and acting as our protectors. And even if we do not live to sit under their shade, yet nonetheless they will grow while we are sleeping, that long sleep in which we may so easily be forgotten. And we are not likely to have more lasting monuments put over us, and we cannot have more gracious ones than the living, rustling trees that we had planted and that we had loved."
This is the perfect place to read that.
Oh,
as
absolutely.
the autograph tree is rustling in the wind and protecting us from the light rain that's happening outside.
Yes, absolutely. It is. It's a cathedral under here. It's a copper beech, as we've said. It's Fagus sylvatica purpurea.
Could you describe the tree for our listeners?
We estimate it's around 200 years old, give or take 20 years.
Well, it's covered in moss, so it looks
covered
very
in
old
moss,
as well.
Yeah, and we're standing underneath like some drooping boughs. It's creating a tent-like atmosphere, and as you look up, it is reminiscent of like a cathedral dome. The drooping boughs are grazing the floor around it. We're completely protected from the elements under here. The girth of the tree itself was measured in 2017, measured 3.5 meters. It's likely put on a little bit of weight since then as well. But we currently have a little boardwalk around the base of the tree so that visitors can look all the way around it.
And protect the roots.
And we have a metal cage which was put in place, I think, in the 70s, or it's been protected since the early 70s, because as well as all of our literary greats, we have a lot of locals and visitors and foresters who have also carved their initials on here over the years.
Right. The temptation is too great.
Too great, yes.
So now they can't do that.
They can't do that at all. But yeah, we have, there's a plaque standing at the base of the tree listing some of the key figures that signed their names. And there are numbers marked on the bark of the tree to help locate them, because over the years, the trees, every signing is damage to the tree. The tree tries to repair itself. It's quite incredible that it's survived all of this repair. Some of the autographs have folded in on themselves now and are really hard to decipher.
Now, on the sign, there are 15 people listed.
Yeah.
And they're markers on the tree where their initials are.
That's it. Yes. So it indicates exactly where each initial was. And then we also list a few other names of significant people who've also signed the tree, but they aren't labelled by number. But if you're interested in learning a little bit more about them, I can tell you who some of them are. There's actually an interesting one. She's not labelled on the tree, but she was an actress called Sarah Allgood. She was one of the leading ladies in many of Lady Gregory's plays. But in her later life, she moved to Hollywood and ended up starring in a lot of the early talkie movies. And she was nominated for an Academy Award for How Green Was My Valley, an old John Ford film from way back.
Now, would a lot of the people have been invited by William Yeats, or both, or...?
Lady Gregory was the sole decider of who signed this tree.
I see.
Yes, this was her tree. She decided.
It must have been considered an honor.
It must have been. Oh, it was indeed. And there were other guests here who weren't invited to sign the tree, even though they were here with the literary greats.
They must have left disappointed. Who comes to visit Coole Park now?
People from all over the world. We have coach tours. We have a lot of Americans come here. We have national tour groups come here. Literary groups, poet groups. Like there's a regular poetry group called the Gathering Cloud Collective, who come and do poetry readings under the tree. Literary students will come, and families, people who just stumble across it, have no idea what they're looking at. And also ecologists. So it appeals to people coming at it from a historical angle and people coming at it from a love of nature. And initially, you felt it yourself, you had to duck through a small opening in the boughs to come and enter into this dome-like tent. And that's the initial impression, is just of awe at the size and just wonderment in looking up at those boughs.
Yeah, I can say when we entered the walled garden, it didn't stand out right away.
No.
Until we got maybe halfway down the path, because it's sort of a wall of leaves.
Yes.
That's what it looks like when you walk up to it. But then you see the tunnel entrance and you walk in, it's a different world under here.
Yeah, it is.
What would you say is the most common question about it?
About the tree?
About the tree or Coole Park?
But the most common question we actually get asked in the visitor centre is what happened to the house, because the house no longer stands.
Right. What did happen to the house?
What did happen to the house? Well, the common misconception is that it was burned during the Troubles. But it wasn't burned at all. Lady Gregory died in 1932. When she died, she had no longer been the owner of the house for 5 years. Her daughter-in-law, Margaret Parry, so her son's wife, had sold the house with Lady Gregory's blessing to the state, and it was run then by the Forestry Service, who then spent the next 60 years planting up available space with commercial timber for lumber. But Lady Gregory, according to Sir William's will, she was entitled to remain in the house until her death. So she actually ended up paying rent to stay in her own house.
Okay.
She paid £100 a year, but But she was actually quite happy that it had gone to the Forestry Service.
Right?
Because
She didn't have to take care of it anymore.
She didn't, but she still was involved. You know, she was delighted that
I'm
planting
sure.
was taking place, that this kind of tree planting legacy was still being continued, and that the estate would remain for future generations as a woodland. So her paying rent, she was no longer receiving rent from tenants. So the upkeep was a little bit hard on the house. And then when she died, the first thing the Forestry Service did was remove the lead from the roof. It's obviously something that could have been recycled at the time. Ireland was a relatively new independent state, and any kind of recycling and saving of money would have been to the fore. Once the weather gets in, then, you know, the demise of the house was...
Once you start dismantling the
increased.
roof,
Yes,
it's
that's
over,
it.
isn't it?
So it was eventually demolished for the price of the stone to a local building contractor in 1941. Sadly.
Okay.
Yes.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll take a walk through that garden gate that Jenny talked about, into the magical woods of the Coole Park Special Area of Conservation with the conservation ranger Margot Pierrell. Then I have a conversation with Lady Gregory scholar James Pethica to dig down into who Lady Gregory was and how the autograph tree helps tell her story. I'm Doug Still, and you're listening to This Old Tree. Hi, I'm Doug Still, and we're back with This Old Tree. So I'm here with the conservation ranger at Coole Park. Could you state your name?
Hi, my name is Margot Pierrell, and yes, I'm the ranger for Coole Park and Garryland Nature Reserve.
So we're in the Coole Garryland Nature Reserve right now.
Yeah, that's correct. So we walked a few kilometers from the walled garden, and now we are now at the heart of the nature reserve. Yeah.
It's a beautiful dark wood, and I wanted to ask you about European beech, because the autograph tree is a European copper beech, but they're throughout this forest, at least this part of the forest, correct?
Yeah, so common beech and copper beech would actually trees that would be considered not native to Ireland. So they're thought to have been imported in the 16th century, but in fact they form most of the woodland in Ireland would be formed of beech trees nowadays. They provide good shelter and food for a lot of animal species. And right now we're standing under one that has been carved just like the autograph tree, but in slight different ways, where it's not protected. Right. The rest of the woodland is composed of pedunculate oak and ash trees, and then there's an understory of hazel and elm.
What was the type of oak tree?
Pedunculate.
Someone was just describing this as the dark wood. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, I suppose on a grey day like today, the beech trees really form that dark atmosphere. It's very sheltered, and it does get very dark. Now, on a sunny day, on a spring and sunny day, it would be a very different story with the fresh leaves and the greenery.
But it'd be wonderful to be in here.
Yeah, but yeah, every day is a different atmosphere in Ireland, really.
So what people have to remember is that this is a nature reserve in addition to the cultural aspect of the park.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Coole Park is known for Lady Gregory and the autograph tree and the walled garden, but it forms part of a bigger estate that is the Coole Garryland Nature Reserve. Now, that nature reserve was established in 1983, and since 1987 it's being managed by the National Parks and Wildlife Service. Now, it is designated under two directives, so under the Habitats Directive, which means it's an SAC, so Special Area of Conservation,
I see.
And under the birth directive, it's also protected as an SPA, a special protection area.
What's the biggest issue you're facing right now in preserving this woodland?
Well, the wood itself has to be protected and managed against invasive species, mostly.
Which a lot of them were, right? They were planted for lumber originally.
Yeah. So those would not be technically considered invasive species, but more non-native. So a lot of the conifers that were planted in the 20th century have been removed now, and these areas that have been cut from conifers are now being regenerated as natural woodland. But now invasive species imported into gardens, for example, have found their way in Galway and in Coole Park, and are affecting a lot of trees.
Now the beech you were encouraging, or you're fine with the beech being here, right?
Well, we have to start somewhere, and the priority was really removing the conifers, the non-native conifers. So the beech now, they form a big part of the woodland. They're not, the beech woodland is not a qualifying interest for the nature reserve. It's not technically protected, but it forms an integral part of it.
We won't tell anyone. We're just going to keep these beech trees.
That's it, yes.
And as I'm learning about Yeats' poetry, he wrote about the swans on this lake.
Yes.
So the swans would come in the winter.
Yes. So the wild swans of Coole Park that Yeats wrote about. So as I mentioned, the nature reserve is also designated as a special protection area for hooper swans.
Hooper swans?
Yes. So the hooper swans are coming from Iceland, and they come and migrate here to spend a milder winter than they would have had in Iceland.
That's a long flight.
It is a pretty long flight, but they can do that in a couple of days, really. And then they have all the food that they want, because turlots are fantastic habitats in terms of grasses that they feed on.
But I can see what they appreciated about this landscape. The open lake area, the deep woods, the pinetum, the walled garden, it's all just very beautiful.
It's very beautiful, and it just sustains them. It provides food and shelter, which is the most important.
And of course, the autograph tree.
And of course, the autograph tree.
Margot, thanks so much for showing me this beautiful forest.
Pleasure.
I got a great view of the autograph tree and absolutely loved the tour through the surrounding woodlands. But who was Lady Gregory, and what made her tick? How did her literary life and mission resonate with Ireland itself? Here's my talk with James Pethica, Senior Lecturer in English and Theatre at Williams College. Thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Lady Gregory is well known in Ireland, but I would hazard to say that most of us from North America and elsewhere don't really know of her. And I know you're working to change that through your work and the authorized biography you have underway.
That's right. First, the question of her being known. She is known, if she is known well across the world, by being Yeats's friend, Yeats's patron. And she, of course, appears in a number of his canonical poems where he's expressing his gratitude for the support she gave him. The biography, yes, I have been at work for some time, as it were, pushing the tanker in a slightly different direction, trying to highlight a foundational role in so many things in Irish culture, literary and artistic culture of the time. First up, I suppose, her support for Yeats. She was really the figure who galvanized his folklore collecting, brought it in a new direction. She was a decent Irish speaker and good at translations, and that gave him access to a mass of new material. Then she helped him in a secretarial and an amanuensis role with his playwriting, and gradually became a playwright herself.
She also facilitated the founding of the Irish Literary Theatre, a 3-year experiment, which in turn led to the Abbey Theatre being built and renovated in 1904, which became Ireland's Abbey Theatre. So an incredible influence here, much of it behind the scenes, through other people, through collaboration.
How would you describe who she was, just in a basic level?
Oh, great question. Born in the west of Ireland, 1852, and when we think of Galway, a country estate in Galway in 1852, that's a long way from the metropolitan centre in Dublin, let alone the metropolitan centre in London.
It feels very different.
Yes, it's a train ride from Galway, but getting to London, it literally is a couple of days. So one of the youngest children in a big, bustling household, which was very insular, not bookish particularly. The Percys, her birth family, were not well liked as landlords, and she has the great fortune. She's 27 years old when she marries the nearby landlord of the large estate, Sir William Gregory. And he's a cultivated man. He was governor of Ceylon in the early 1870s. He'd been an MP in the British Parliament for a number of terms from early on. And he is 35 years older than her. She marries just at the point where it looks like she's 27 years old in 1880.
Right, to get married.
Nobody expects her to get an offer. And he is looking for a companion in old age, looking for somebody who is bookish, and lights on her, and it transforms her world. She immediately goes to London and is introduced into this cultivated world. He's been a colonial governor and knows all the political people. She's dining with the prime minister, cabinet ministers, the rest. And her
life just changed.
Absolutely. And he has significant artistic interests. He's a director, a director of the National Gallery in London. So knows all the artistic figures as well. So you can imagine the dinner parties in the London house. Robert Browning is there, Henry James is there. And it launches her into an entirely new world of travel to India and Ceylon and so on. And she starts her earliest writings in the 1880s in a very tentative way, looking for a subject. She writes travel articles, journalistic articles, but then they're not in any systematic way connected with our Irish culture. And it's not until towards the end of the married period that she starts turning her attention to the world around her. And there are reasons for that. From around 1880 onward, there was what was termed the land war in Ireland, where tenants are pushing basically for land distribution. And bit by bit, it's clear that the stranglehold of particularly Protestant landlords and absentee landlords is going to be broken up. There are several efforts to pass home rule bills in the British government. And she becomes more than peripherally involved in that, given the tenants on the Gregory's own estate are campaigning for change, and starts to pay more attention. Not to say that she hadn't had close relationships with her tenants beforehand. She was somebody who was deeply influenced by the idea of noblesse oblige. It is your duty as somebody who has money, has status, to help those who are less fortunate. So even as a young woman, she's gone out on the estate as a philanthropist, trying to help people. But from around the late 1880s onwards, she's paying much more attention and is starting to realize there is a distinctive culture which she's attracted by. And then when she starts reading the early writings of the so-called Irish Literary Revival, and particularly when she encounters Yeats's work, that's it. She makes this turn. Her allegiances literally shift. Instead of being a unionist, supportive of the British connection, she starts to become a nationalist and is working for home rule for Ireland.
As you were saying, a lot of her efforts culturally and in her writings are intertwined with Yeats. How did they meet, and why did they form such an immediate friendship?
They meet briefly at some evening soiree in 1894. And I think it's fair to say that she already has her eye on him. Her diary entry reads, "At the Morrises I met Yeats, looking every inch a poet." There's the tell. Right. Though his Celtic Twilight is the best work, I think is the best work he has done. And the Celtic Twilight was a collection of folklore, mainly from the Sligo region.
And she was already interested in that.
She's starting to get interested in it. She's written a few short stories, is writing to friends in London, relating little stories she's heard and turns of phrase that interest her. She doesn't meet Yeats again, as far as we know, until nearly 2 years later when he's visiting a near neighbour of hers, Edward Martin. And she takes her chance. She goes over, introduces herself. And I'm pretty sure that she already knew he was coming to visit, because a couple of weeks beforehand, she's already starting collecting folklore and invites him and the person he's touring Ireland with to come to lunch at her estate at Coole. And she gives him this little collection of folklore and is talking about the things she's been doing. So he's interested immediately, I think, because she's a potential resource. And she makes it clear very early on she's willing to be a patron, a supporter. When they meet in London the following spring, she embarks on, I suppose, what you'd call a charm offensive, inviting him to dinner to meet important people, people that she thinks that he will be impressed by. Henry James she invites to dinner. That dinner doesn't happen, but there's a sequence of people she brings in, making connections for him, showing thing of her own, if you like, her status. I'm somebody who has a social milieu that may be of use to you.
Is he very young at this time?
He is, let me get this exactly right, 31 years old, and hard up, scrabbling, writing journalism to pay the rent on his little London apartment. And in comes this person who basically signals to him very early on, I'm ready to support you. She sends him food hampers from Ireland, and then in quite short order starts giving him money. And there's a moment in his autobiography where he says, a few weeks later, I found £20 left behind the clock on my mantelpiece. And I went and said, I went to try and return it to her, but she said, the only wrong thing is not doing your best work. You must give up journalism. So there's the essential equation. I'll support you. I want to support your poetry. I want to support your writing.
And did he introduce her to other writers at the time, or was it the other way around, or mutual?
It's mutual, but as far as the Irish side of it, he's the one who's making it possible for her to rise quickly, provides her with the opportunities to become a significant figure in the Irish revival. She knows mainly British writers before this. She knows a few people, but he's introducing her to his inner circle, writers like George Russell, Douglas Hyde, and others.
I can't help but think of other figures in the early 20th century, like Gertrude Stein in Paris, or Peggy Guggenheim, or Isabella Stewart Gardner, who through their passion and energy and wealth and position were patrons of the arts and brought intellectuals and like-minded artists together. Would you call Lady Gregory, and maybe Yeats too, the leader of sort of a literary or cultural salon, or would you characterize it differently?
Salon's the awkward word there. And unlike a figure such as Isabella Stewart Gardner, who Gregory got to meet later, and they got on like a house on fire, strong, independent women, Lady Gregory was not wealthy. Quite the reverse. This was a relatively encumbered estate. She didn't have money to throw around, and it was the house itself and the hospitality, the peace and quiet, the retreat that it offered.
I see.
So more important for Yeats and the others. So Yeats, in his poem Coole Park 1929, uses the phrase excellent company. Yes, she did bring like-minded people together, workers for the movement together. A salon, I think, cultivates a different kind of sense.
A little more too formal.
Yes, and a little too self-conscious. She wanted to be amongst interesting people and wanted to facilitate the work of interesting people. John Butler Yeats, W.B. Yeats's father, termed her the organizer of success. George Russell, in a letter to her, writes about the laboratory at Coole. So maybe those terms get nearer to what she was trying to do.
Now, Yeats had an estate or a house nearby, Thor Ballylee. Did I pronounce that right?
You did. He didn't have that until 20 years after his first summer stay at Coole.
Okay.
Indeed, he, as I've suggested, was a hard up man in 1896 who needed the support.
So he found some success later on, obviously, and then was able to move there. How did that work?
This is awkward. Yeats's buying of Thor Ballylee in 1916, 20 years after he spent 20 summers, 3 months of the year at Coole Park. His purchase of the tower was in many ways a break from Lady Gregory, an assertion of independence, a wish to escape. Maybe escape is too hard a word, but to give himself some distance from a relationship which in some ways had become constraining, too fixed. He wanted to marry, and he did in 1917, restores the tower, as he says in a poem, for my wife, George. So on the one hand, buying a medieval tower and restoring it 3 or 4 miles from Lady Gregory's house is an act of solidarity, an expression of his commitment to the area. But in another way, it's also, I'm not going to be spending my nights at your house anymore.
But that's interesting that it was a little bit of a break. What did the autograph tree mean to Lady Gregory? And have you found reference to it in any of her writings?
She mentions it in a couple of autobiographical writings, but nothing in her letters. What did it mean to her? Earlier in her life, early in her married life, she would ask guests and important people she met to sign their names on a fan she had. And the first fan, it's mainly political figures, people with political power. And some writers, Robert Browning is on there, but the writers are more likely to be historians than poets or playwrights. And then she has a second fan, and you can already see that her life is shifting by the late 1880s, early 1890s, because she's starting to collect writers more than anybody else. And the second fan becomes an Irish fan, more overwhelmingly Irish writers, and she keeps that fan. New names keep going in until the late 1920s. So what's she trying to achieve by having people write their name on a fan and then later carve their name into a tree? That's the question.
Yes.
And I think it changes. Early on, it's lionizing people who are famous and maybe being a little starstruck by them. So early on, lionization, but also a demonstration of her standing. You pull out that fan, look at all these important people I know.
That's right.
It raises her own profile. And then the second fan, it's maybe already signaling on some level her arrival. Look, this is the company I'm in, the company I want to be in. But by the time it's the autograph tree, I think it's, on the one hand, yes, simply a guest book. These are my famous guests. But there's potentially a power play at work here. You get to sign because you're important enough. You don't. So it's making a complicated statement. It's also wanting to make of Coole Park and her home itself a monument, I think, which she does quite consciously in some of her last writings. At the point where the estate has already been sold to the forestry department, she knows it's going to be swept away. Yeats is already anticipating that it's going to be a mound of rubble. He says that in a poem before she's even dead.
How did she feel about that?
Oh, such a great question. She knew she had accomplished something, and is smart enough to recognize that the building itself, the presence of the library, the furniture in the rooms, in a sense, doesn't matter. Her last book, Coole, her last prose work, it's a very cunning book. It describes the material actuality of the house in great detail. We get descriptions of the color of spines of books and where things are and where paintings are on the wall. And James Joyce famously, said, I don't know whether it's apocryphal or not, that Dublin could be rebuilt using his books as the template. And I think she's thinking in the same vein. The house itself may be gone, but it's preserved, fixed, not photographically, but fixed nonetheless in some important way by the writings themselves. So, of course, she was sorry that the Gregory connection, which had gone on for so many generations in this place, was going to be broken. But I think she was confident that the cultural, the literary, the political accomplishment that she valorized would go on.
That would be the legacy,
yes.
The cultural legacy, although the tree is one of the few physical things remaining.
Yes, though the core outlines of the garden is there, the place where the house stood. There's a visitor centre. It is a monument in its way.
Yeats was inspired by that landscape, wasn't he? I mean, he wrote The Wild Swans at Coole.
Yes. Well, it figures again and again in his poetry. And he says, this is, along with Sligo, the place that I dream of.
Lady Gregory had a direct role in shaping Coole the way it looks today, and it turns out she was quite the tree planter, as described by Dr. Anna Pills, an independent researcher and fellow at the University of Edinburgh. She has written extensively about Lady Gregory's plays and their transnational production histories, and she also noticed Gregory's repeated references to tree planting in her writing. Lady Gregory's unique love of trees, coming up after the break. This is This Old Tree. Hi, I'm Doug Still, and we're back with This Old Tree. So Anna, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
When Sir William Gregory died in 1892, Lady Gregory was suddenly in charge of the Coole estate, including, of course, the grounds. How would you describe the property at that time? Was there a forest?
Yes, there certainly was, shall we say, woodland, which is how she often kind of put it. She's always referring to it and talking about the woods of Coole. So when she entered widowhood at the age of 40, she took over the management of the estate, which at that point was around about 5,000 acres. And as people might know from the poetry of William Butler Yeats, who wrote about the 7 woods of Coole, there were 7 kind of distinct parts.
I understand that Lady Gregory was very hands-on in terms of decision-making and the feel of the park, when she took over. Could you talk about that a little bit, and who did she work with to manage the property?
So as part of managing the estate, there would have been gardeners as well as kind of woodmen who would have worked on the estate. And in a book she wrote about Coole Park, just titled Coole, she's writing about her companion and woodcutter, who was called John Ferrell. And he had worked on the Coole estate for a long period of time, and was very much acquainted with all the domain woods. And she is having these, she's describing how they both kind of go out in their, galoshes and in the appropriate attire with a fork, and kind of looking around and looking after the nurslings and protecting them from animals such as squirrels. She's ordering kind of, seedlings and saplings, and she's planting those, choosing where to get them from, what to plant, and taking kind of great care, and also kind of really looking at that element of, I suppose, sustainability and environmental stewardship that we now think about.
I understand in her journals, her appreciation for trees comes to the fore. She writes about them a lot. And she wrote one article in particular in 1898 called Tree Planting. And you wrote a scholarly article about it, Lady Gregory's tree planting, a few years ago. What was it about, and what was she trying to accomplish by writing it?
Yeah, so that kind of quite short article on tree planting appeared in a short kind of magazine, a periodical of the time titled The Irish Homestead. And that was very much a periodical that was connected to the Agricultural Organization Society, so the cooperative movement. And it was run by a friend of hers called Horace Plunkett. And it was really a periodical that looked towards enabling farmers and local agriculture to improve their kind of skills and to advocate for kind of self-help.
But this wasn't just like a ladies' gardening journal or anything like that.
This was a practical, applied sort of output in that sense. And that's very much the tone of the piece as well. There are different layers to that article, where she's on the one hand acknowledging that if the kind of tree felling continues to go apace, Ireland will be denuded of its kind of woodlands. So it's very much an interventionist sort of piece that advocates for the need for reforestation, and then draws on the various kind of benefits of woodland to the nation, or to the country, especially within the kind of wider context of nationalism, both cultural and political, that was vibrant at the time, but also thinking of the aesthetics of trees and how, pleasant they are in terms of the landscape element of it. And she's also talking about how trees are a form of like a monument and a legacy that one kind of leaves behind. And there's also a very kind of personal element to it. So she speaks about her kind of personal relationship. Trees and woodlands have to be cared for like friendships. So she makes that analogy that they have to be treated, like friendships, and have to be kept in constant repair. And she warns her readers that the day will come when, they will be but a memory. And I suppose that kind of speaks to our current moment of, envisioning a kind of replanting at a kind of grand scale. But for her, it's kind of making the argument more on the cultural side, because at the opening of the article, she makes that clear line between trees and kind of language, referring to the old Irish language, the Ogham, as a tree alphabet. And so recalling trees is by way of connecting with that kind of linguistic and older tradition and heritage.
Do you have a passage that demonstrates what you were describing?
Sure. So in Tree Planting, Gregory writes, Ireland, more than other countries, ought to be a country of trees, for the very letters of her alphabet are named after them. So there you have that strong connection between trees and letters and language that we now find in artistic expressions, such as Katie Holton's great tree alphabet that she created, where, again, you kind of write in trees.
Lady Gregory was active in translating and promoting traditional Irish folklore. Did trees appear in the folklore that she found?
Yes, definitely. And in fact, John Ferrell, so the woodcutter with whom she, walked through the woods and worked in the woods, is one of those people who would have told stories or kind of have these folklore tales and share them both with Gregory and with Yeats, and they would make their way into their kind of publications. So John Farrell, for instance, talks about particular strange visions that come to him in the woods of Coole. So where, he sees this kind of young girl with kind of long hair close by the lake in the kind of wild part of the woods that's close to Coole Lake. And he's telling her that, he's seen a girl picking gnats with her hair hanging over her shoulders, brown hair, and she had a good clean face and was tall and nothing on her head, and her dress was no way gaudy but simple, and when she felt me coming she gathered herself up and was gone as if the earth had swallowed her. So
wow, that's
that sense of having a vision, and obviously within folklore there's the tradition of the banshee, or a fairy that lives in the tree, and a tradition of kind of fairy trees that are often hawthorn trees, that farmers or people who believe in those kind of traditions don't want to cut down, because then you might bring ill on your family or on your farm.
And so it got around. People wanted to be invited to sign the tree.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it was known as well. So Sean O'Casey referred to it as the sacred tree of Coole. And it's a way of her marking her importance as well, of kind of bringing these people together and shaping this cultural kind of movement. So it's sort of a monument to her legacy. If we're thinking of her, how she writes about trees and tree planting as monuments, lasting monuments, then, the autograph tree definitely is a monument.
So, Wayne, what are you working on now?
Well, thanks to Gregory's love for trees and tree planting, she got me onto a big sort of research project that looks at Irish writing and the ways in which it engages in narratives of deforestation of Ireland's countryside from the 16th to the 21st century. And I look at texts from Edmund Spenser to Sheridan Le Fanu to James Joyce to Elizabeth Bowen, including Lady Gregory.
Circling back around, all our guests shared how they are inspired by the autograph tree in the Coole Park Nature Reserve. Starting with Dr. Pethica, I sort of put him on the spot with a Lady Gregory question. As a biographer of Lady Gregory and studying her for so long, especially her correspondence, you must feel like you know her. And if you could sit down with her in her walled garden and chat, what would you ask her? Are there any mysteries you'd like to know about?
I think if a biographer believes they know their subject, they're in great danger. What we have is an archive of material, letters, diaries, other kinds of documents, pictures, photographs, and then other material realia. And it's a great scattered, incomplete jigsaw. And one can put together various kinds of pictures from it. I still find Lady Gregory very impressive, a powerful figure. As Sean O'Casey said, she wasn't rich, she wasn't good looking. She had relatively few resources, yet this woman managed to foster something as well as create powerfully herself. And in the Ireland of the time, how many women writers were able to do that? But what would I ask her? I think I'd probably at this point be too terrified.
I'm sure you'd get along.
There are things, of course, I'd like to ask and know the answer to. But if we sit down with somebody who has thought about their own life, is skilled in the art of self-presentation, as Lady Gregory was. This is a woman who faced interviewers in the US on her lecture tours every day and was bombarded with questions. And she, I think it's fair to say, put up a certain face, as T.S. Eliot would say, to meet the faces that she met.
Right.
And if I were, to be transported back in time and would ask probing personal questions, I think that I would get...
You'd get that face.
I'd get that face. I'd get a straight cricket bat. So it's a nice illusion to imagine that one could ask the question that would unlock the locked box.
Right.
But I don't think you get it.
To me, when I think back of visiting Coole or kind of just moving through these spaces and thinking about the people who have walked along those paths, you know, what thoughts they carried with them, what ideas and projects they were working on at the time, and how that kind of environment then made it into the richness of the text that came out of that period, and how much I suppose that place is kind of foundational to so much thinking that went on, that it has kind of that mythical thing around it. But it was also, you know, when it's described as the workshop at Coole, it's something very kind of pragmatic and collaborative, and, you know, it's a working estate as well.
And finally, back outside at Coole with Margot and Jenny. And Yeats used to just walk through these forests, and I'm told that people would pass by him and he would say nothing. He was deep in his own thoughts.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I mean, you would pass by me nowadays and I would probably be lost in my thoughts as well.
So you have some similarities with W.B. Yeats.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when you're in such a spectacular nature reserve or woodland, you want to enjoy it fully. You want to listen to the birds and the animals rustling the branches. You want to listen to the river and the turlock making these water sounds. You really want to be in it.
When I first started working here, I was slightly oblivious of its literary importance, I will admit. I was here for the nature and love of nature. Over time, and with people's responses to the tree and delving more into the history of it, I'm also awe-inspired, both for the tree's natural beauty, but the history that surrounds it, all the people that have been here. When you're standing under this tree and if you cast your mind back, if you can just visualize, you know, the kind of people who would have been coming here.
That's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, it is. It kind of takes your breath away. Yeah, I'm awe-inspired.
I won't soon forget the autograph tree and its caretaker, Lady Gregory. The copper beech towering in her garden is stunning in its own right, and its legend draws people to it in reverence to a period of cultural importance and national pride. To me, the story of the autograph tree is wonderfully and uniquely Irish. I'd like to thank Jenny Maguire and Margot Pierrell for sharing their knowledge on the show, and also Becky Teasdale and Niall O'Reilly at Coole for their help, kindness, and warm hospitality. I'd also like to thank James Pethica and Anna Pills for their brilliant interviews and research involving Lady Gregory. And I'd like to thank you, tree lovers, for listening to the show once again. You can find photos and more information about the autograph tree on Facebook, Instagram, and the website thisoldtree.show. By the way, this incredible music you've been listening to is a traditional piece called Cailleach an Airgid, which translates from Gaelic as the hag with the money. A cailleach is associated with the creation of landscape and also the weather. It was performed by Sonic Strings, a local youth ensemble from Coole Music and Arts in Gort. The arrangement was by Katharina Baker, and the soloist was Lillian Owens. So haunting and beautiful. There's an incredible video of Sonic Strings performing it on a rocky outcrop in the Aran Islands, filmed with use of a drone. It's awesome. Check it out on YouTube. Thank you so much for sharing your music. You've been listening to This Old Tree. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to This Old Tree. This Old Tree is sponsored by Schwartz Tree and Landscaping in Cranston, Rhode Island. Professional tree service, landscaping, and plant management. Visit schwartztreecare.com or call 401-941-4440.